Hey everybody, welcome to an episode of Ask the DM. This is your host, Andrew Block, and today I'm going to be addressing a very important issue that I have seen come up recently in my games, and that is, are your actions as a player character hurting your game? Now, what I mean by this is, are your actions as a character hindering the progress of your campaign or adventure, or even just the scene that you're in? Are your actions as a player character just not moving the scene forward? Now, in simple terms, you can think of it as player actions as having either a positive, a neutral, or a negative attribute. And this reflects how those actions affect the momentum of the campaign, the adventure, or the scene, or even the actions of the other players that are partaking in the campaign, adventure, or scene. And I think it's a good idea for players to stop for a second, don't deliberate on it too much. Does my action have a positive, a neutral, or a negative impact on what we're doing? A lot of players may think that has moral implications. I'm talking strictly in a narrative capacity. So what does a positive action look like? A positive action propels the scene forward in some way. A good example of a positive action in a campaign is, let's say that the DM has a villager come up to the party and tells the party, hey, there's a dragon outside of town somewhere. We don't know where the dragon's lair is, but he's been eating the sheep of the local farmers and stuff like that. Okay. So the party, is a positive action, would say, let's go look for this dragon's lair. And they set out to look for the dragon's lair. Or they start researching it. Does anybody know about dragons? Yeah, roll a knowledge check. Boom. Green dragons typically hang out in forested areas. Oh, there's a forest just outside of town. Etc., etc., etc. That propels the campaign, or rather the adventure, forward. An example of a neutral action in that particular scenario is the villager comes up, says, hey, the dragon's eating our livestock. What are you going to do about it? And the villager or the party simply says, we'll get to it when we can. And they go off to their respective tavern. They deliberate on it. What are we going to get out of this? Is it worth dealing with a dragon? The dragon might be too tough for us. That's the example of a neutral action, possibly even a negative action, because you're not moving forward. Okay, the DM has presented a hook for an adventure, and the party is not taking it. They have basically shooed it away. A negative action would be outright ejecting it, telling the villager, no, we're not going to deal with this dragon. Deal with it yourself. Go find the local guard. This is their problem. They need to deal with it. Contact your duke or your baron or whoever is in charge of this place and have them deal with it. Or an even better example of a negative action is they accept the adventure, but then they go about trying to hire another band of adventurers to deal with it rather than deal with it themselves. An example of a positive action affecting other players. Let's use the same scenario. The villager comes up, hey, there's a dragon eating our livestock. One of the party members says, yes, we're going to deal with the dragon. One of the other players speaks up and says, hey, I know about dragons. And it kind of borrows from what I said earlier about the whole, they start researching the dragon. Instead of asking the DM a bunch of questions and getting answers, one of the players takes the initiative and makes a positive action towards that. One of the players says, hey, I know about dragons. It's in my backstory. My character grew up in dragon-filled territory. Do I know anything special about dragons? DM can use that to propel the story forward. Yes, you know that this area is filled with green dragons. Green dragons typically make their lairs in forests, and they do this and they do that, and they're immune to this and that, and etc., etc., etc. Now, the first character took the positive action to take the step over the line and accept the quest, as it were, and start the adventure. The other character took the positive action to start moving forward, and then another player could say, well, we need better equipment. I remember that there's an enchanter in the next town over. It's a little bit out of our way. Not too far, though. We can go there and possibly get a little bit of enchantments, or even some healing potions at least, and we can be ready to go in a day and then go into the forest and deal with this dragon. That's another positive action. Neutral action in this scenario would be the first player again says, yes, we'll deal with the dragon, but the other players kind of waffle on the decision. They're like, well, I don't know if we can deal with the dragon. Maybe we should do a lot more research. Let's spend the next couple days at the library trying to dig up as much dirt on who this dragon is, what his motivations are, why he's here. We need all the information we can get because we need all the advantages we can get. While this isn't a bad thing, that's actually the start of a positive action. But as soon as they start that, and the DM says, okay, this is what you learn. You learn that this area has green dragons, and green dragons typically make their lairs in forests. And that's pretty much all you learn. Now the players continue to press the issue. Well, we need this. I go to search another library. And the players just keep trying to dig at this thing when it becomes fairly obvious that the DM either feels that they don't need further information, or there just isn't information there to give up. And it's a neutral action because it's not moving anything forward. It's just a waste of time. The information, it's all flavor, and it's fun, and it's nice to have, eventually you turn up that the dragon's name is Spitznaz. He's from the north a little ways, and he was bullied as a child, and he hates all humans. He has a particular dislike for elves, and blah, 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 blah. And it's all this lore that adds in a bunch of flavor that really paints a really vivid picture, and it's really nice. But ultimately, in the end, it doesn't matter. The DM, from the very get-go, obviously either didn't have that information or just didn't feel it was necessary to fill in those blanks because he just wanted you guys to go into the forest and fight a dragon. And sometimes the adventures are just as simple as that. So dwelling on things like gathering information and recon and stuff like that just isn't necessary. Those are neutral actions. Okay, a negative action that affects a player would be, we have the villager come up, hey, the dragon's eating our livestock, what are you going to do? A player says, we'll deal with it. Another player chimes in and says, no, hold on, we're not going to deal with it. That second player's action has just nullified the first player's action and made it a zero-sum game. While this doesn't seem bad at first, it has just stalled forward momentum of the game. For a moment, this isn't bad, okay? Now, if that second player says, no, we're going to have to think about this, and he's playing a pretty greedy player, and he says, what are we going to get out of this? And the villager says, well, I don't know. Maybe you can get a reward from from the Baron or the Duke or something like that. And then the other player says, okay, well, we're going to talk to the Duke about it before we decide on what we're going to do. That's a little bit different. But if he just outright says, no, we're not going to deal with this, forget about what that first guy said, this isn't our problem, that's a negative action affecting the situation because you've just nullified what the first player said. A better example of a negative action affecting a positive action is a classic tavern brawl situation. Let's say you have a party in a tavern and they're just enjoying some drinks. You have, just for argument's sake, you have a half-orc and a paladin, a pair of buddies. They're sitting there enjoying the drinks after the spoils of a good dungeon crawl, and a dwarf comes up. He doesn't like orcs, obviously, and he starts insulting the half-orc. The half-orc doesn't take too kindly to this, and he stands up and he throws a punch. He's a little inebriated. Some of his self-control is a little gone, so he throws a punch at the dwarf. He doesn't take kindly to the insults to his mother. Okay? That is a positive action because it's starting something a little exciting. Okay? You're moving a little bit of a scene forward. It's not a particularly helpful scene, but it is something to break up kind of the monotony. It's a little bit of a brawl, can be fun, that kind of thing. But we have the paladin, who, playing a lawful good character, stands up and grabs his fist and says, no, we should practice restraint. That is a negative action. That has just canceled the orc's positive action and turned that possibly exciting tavern brawl, a little break from the monotony, into nothing. The dwarf walks off and says, I always knew you were a coward. Now, I have noticed that, and this isn't meant to be an insult, because for a long time I have been one of these players, that the players who are heavy RP players are the ones who tend to make neutral and negative actions. And this is because they are heavily influenced by their character's motivations. And they are so deep-rooted by these motivations that they have a hard time letting go or bending those motivations to suit the needs of the game or the scene. The paladin, in the last example, using his lawful goodness to stop the orc from initiating or retaliating and propelling that scene forward, is a great example. That player felt obligated as a lawful good player. He's playing the kind of paladin who has to prohibit unnecessary violence and all this stuff. He felt it's his moral obligation to just stop everything in its tracks because that's, quote, what his character would do, end quote. This becomes a problem because we are playing a fictitious game, and we are not our characters, and we are trying to tell a story. And for exciting events to happen in this story, in this fictitious game, we need to let things happen. Whether it be something as stupid as a tavern brawl, or to let our characters do something as stupid as running into a forest to fight a dragon, unprepared, unmatched, and possibly running to their deaths. We have to let these things happen. We have to let these events unfold, because that's how the story gets told. If we prevent these events from happening, or we sit around and waffle on the decisions that will let these events get told, we're not propelling the game forward. We're not telling stories at that point. Well, we're not telling good stories at this point. So if you find yourself making decisions or taking actions that stifle other players or stifle the forward progress of the game, try and find ways to kind of bend a little bit and let these events unfold. I'm not saying that you have to ditch your character motivations or disregard your character concept. If you're playing that lawful good paladin, that feels the need to, abhor violence as a solution to problems. That's fantastic. That's actually a really good concept. But don't jump at the chance to try and stifle other characters from taking actions that will propel a scene forward into an exciting thing. Using that half-orc, the dwarf, and the paladin example, maybe just let the half-orc punch the dwarf and little bit of a fight happen while the paladin just kind of stands by, shocked at the amount of violence that's happening. And then after everything kind of comes to its conclusion or reaches an apex, where the half-orc is about to kill the dwarf because he's so enraged, that's when the paladin steps in and says, whoa, 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 brothers, we do not need to kill to solve our differences. And then you heal the dwarf and say, you should not have angered my friend. He is prone to violence, and letting his other half take over, or, something to that effect. That way you can let the scene happen, but still play to your character's concept and his morality and all those things. And you're bending a little bit to let the scene happen, but you're not abandoning your concept. Take positive actions. Neutral actions are okay as long as they don't become so excessive that you're just spending the entire session just going nowhere. Take a couple neutral actions, trying to gauge your limits, trying to figure out whether or not you can move forward with those actions. And if not, just leave that situation alone and move to the positive actions. If you find yourself taking negative actions that are moving you away from the adventure or the campaign or the scene, or outright just canceling the actions of another player, stop doing that. Unless it's a scenario that you really just don't want to get involved with. And at that point, you really need to have a discussion with your GM talking about the style of game that they're running. Because obviously they want to run a certain style of game, and you're not interested in doing that type of game. And that's a whole subject for a different day. Until next time, this has been Andrew Block, and I hope you have found this advice a little bit insightful. And if you have any questions about a topic that you would like to hear me talk about, please leave comments in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe, like this video if it was helpful. Even if it wasn't helpful, if you just found it entertaining or think it might help your DM or another player in your party. And if you would like to get notified whenever I leave new content on my channel, whether it be related to board games or a new Ask the DM episode or Goblin Talk, please hit that little bell to get subscribed to my content, and you'll get notifications as to when that stuff comes up. And I will talk to you soon.